The roar of the crowd was a living, pulsating sound, an energy Jalen Carter absorbed with every cell of his body. The lights of the Superdome in New Orleans were pinpricks of light that blended into a sea of hope and expectation. He could smell the pungent odor of heated turf, the salty aroma of sweat, and the electric tension of the game with every breath he took. A final play. The clock was ticking down, a chance to win it all. This was the moment he had trained for, the one his community in Mid-City had dreamed of with him. At 24, Jalen wasn't just a wide receiver. He was a living symbol of Black excellence and the embodiment of a community's hopes. For them, his success was a form of redemption, a powerful rebuttal to the systemic forces that had tried to hold them back. He had built his confidence on the certainty of his body's ability, a well-oiled machine of muscle and bone, sculpted by years of discipline and sacrifice. He lined up on the scrimmage line, the worn turf of the Superdome warm and giving beneath his cleats. His muscles were coils of tension, his mind the quiet, focused hum. The snap came, and the world of Jalen Carter dissolved into a blur of speed and focus. The sounds of the crowd, the shouts of his teammates, all faded into a distant thrumming. He burst from the line, his steps a perfect, metronomic echo of precision. He turned his body for a crucial change of direction, a move he had rehearsed 1,000 times. The ball was thrown in a perfect arc, a piece of brown leather navigating the night air. He planted his foot, ready to pivot. That's when it happened. It wasn't a roar or a shout from the crowd. It was a sound that came from deep within his own body. A dry, metallic crack, like a branch snapping under a heavy weight of snow. The sound echoed in his ears, a chilling final note in a symphony of motion. Time slowed to a crawl. The world went mute. The roar of the crowd vanished, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. The pain was a secondary concern. The shock was the dominant emotion. His knee bent in an unnatural direction, and he saw, through a film of sudden tears, a piece of loose tissue shifting under his skin, a tangible manifestation of a future lost. He fell, a silent, broken mass of pain on the field he once owned. He was the personification of a fear that haunts every athlete, the sudden, brutal vulnerability that the very system that profited from him was designed to ignore. In the stark silence of the locker room, the shock gave way to a cold, burning anger. He lay on a training table, the sterile smell of disinfectant mixing with the raw, metallic scent of his own fear. The physical pain was a distant ache, but the weight of a far deeper anguish settled over him. His body, the one tool he had, the one thing that defined him, had betrayed him. The team doctor approached, his voice a cold, impersonal litany of technical terms. ACL rupture, immediate surgery, return in 9 to 12 months. The conversation was rushed, clinical, as if he were discussing a broken part that needed a quick repair. There was no time for emotional or psychological processing. The system saw him as an asset, a piece of machinery damaged in transit, a resource that needed to be put back on the market as soon as possible. This was the embodiment of weathering in sport, the disproportionate way the bodies of Black athletes are treated by the athletic system, denying them the recovery time and holistic attention needed for a complete and safe return. Jalen felt like an outsider in his own body, a broken machine on a list of statistics. He wasn't a person, he was a commodity. The ride home was a painful, silent journey. The vibrant jazz music and the savory aroma of Creole cooking that wafted from the street bars and restaurants of New Orleans seemed to mock him, a painful contrast to his internal anguish. He felt disconnected from the city's rhythm, a ghost in his own life, a silent observer floating above reality. The city's physical spaces, his neighborhood, the stadium, the very streets he grew up on, became a cruel reflection of his journey, a constant reminder of his previous triumph and his sudden, brutal fall. Upon arriving home, the sight of his father, Marcus Carter, intensified the weight of his situation. Marcus's gaze was not one of pity, but one of a deep, silent disappointment, a knowing sadness. He saw in his father's eyes the echo of stories he had heard in his childhood, stories of other promises the system had crushed, of other dreams that had turned to dust. Marcus was a man of the old guard, a pragmatist who had witnessed the system break more souls than bodies. He had seen the sports desert of their youth, the lack of quality facilities, and the countless young men who had tried to climb out only to fall back down. The father saw his son not just as an individual, but as the personification of a cycle of promises and disappointments that seemed impossible to break. The silence in the air was a heavy weight, filled with the unspoken intergenerational trauma of a community that had seen this play out before. Marcus didn't need to say a word. The burden of history was palpable. Jalen felt small, not just because of the injury, but because of the immense weight of a past he was now unwillingly a part of. The physical pain of his knee mixed with the psychological pain of this sudden crisis of identity. The fall on the field was not just an end. It was the quiet, terrifying beginning of a battle far more complex and silent than any he had ever fought before.
Jalen's rehabilitation journey began in a space that felt more like a warehouse for broken parts than a place of healing. The air was thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant and the low, constant hum of impersonal machines. This was a clinic recommended by the team, and the physical therapy sessions were a generic, mechanical routine. The physical therapist, a young man with a tired expression, treated Jalen like a number, a body on an assembly line. He was given a sheet of exercises, heel slides, quad sets, straight leg raises, the same ones he could have found in any generic pamphlet. There was no conversation about the pain, the fear, or the crushing frustration building inside him. The only objective was to put him back on the field as quickly as possible. The system once again manifested itself not as a visible opponent, but as a silent, bureaucratic indifference. Jalen was an asset, a damaged one that needed a quick, cost-effective fix, not a person in need of holistic care. The insurance, a symbol of this systemic villain, would only cover a limited number of sessions, far from what was needed for a complete, safe, and secure recovery. He felt the weight of being a disposable commodity, an item on a list of statistics, his well-being secondary to the organization's bottom line. The narrative delved deeper into Jalen's past, using flashbacks to connect his current struggle to the very nature of his silent villain. He remembered his childhood in a sports desert, a place with limited access to quality sports facilities. He recalled the smell of hot asphalt and the uneven sound of the football bouncing on cracked cement courts. His journey to become a top college athlete was never just a dream. It was a constant, exhausting struggle to escape this physical desert, to prove that excellence could thrive in a place where opportunity was scarce. The irony of his current situation was a bitter pill to swallow. He had escaped the physical desert of his youth, only to find himself trapped in a new, equally unforgiving one, the desert of generic, uncaring rehabilitation. The system that had recruited him for his exceptional talent was the very same one that, in its indifference, was now failing to provide him with a sustainable path to healing. The flashbacks made it clear Jalen's life had always been a battle against a system that gave with one hand and took with the other, a cycle of promises and disappointments that seemed impossible to break. In a moment of profound frustration, Jalen went to his father. The words came out in a rush, a torrent of anger and despair, He spoke of the clinic, of the mechanical exercises, of the lack of care, and of the fear of never being the same. Marcus, a man of few words, listened, his expression a mask of stoic realism. He had seen this before. He had heard these stories 1,000 times in his community, but this time, it was his son. Seeing the deep disappointment in Jalen's eyes, a reflection of the same disillusionment he had seen in so many others, Marcus made a decision. He took Jalen to a place he had never considered before, a state-of-the-art sports science clinic, a place outside the team's medical care system. The moment Jalen stepped inside, he felt a profound shift. The air was clean, smelling not of stale disinfectant, but of promise and possibility. The low, pleasant hum of advanced equipment was a stark contrast to the sterile, mechanical sounds of the other clinic. There Jalen met Dr. Anya Sharma. She was the antithesis of everything he had experienced so far. Her first question wasn't about his knee, it was about what he feared most. This simple, human question shocked Jalen. Anya wasn't interested in just the ACL rupture. She wanted to understand his injured confidence. She explained that the psychological impact of his injury was just as important as the physical one. She was the perfect foil to the systemic villain, a principled figure who saw the athlete as a complete human being, not a broken machine. Anya introduced the concept of sports science not as a mere treatment, but as a form of empowerment, a tool for revolution. She spoke of the terrifying statistic, a 38% re-injury rate for athletes who rush back to the field without meeting key performance criteria. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a direct consequence of a system that prioritizes short-term gains over long-term safety. She proposed a meticulous 9-month rehabilitation plan based on SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. She promised him that the journey would be bloody hard work, but that the goal wasn't just to return to play. The goal was to return stronger and smarter than before, to expose the failure of the system and prove that a different, better way was possible. The scene ended with a new sense of purpose in Jalen's eyes. He wasn't just preparing for a comeback, he was preparing for a battle. And his revenge would not be against an opponent on the field, but against a system that had nearly broken him. His victory would be a testament to a new path, a new legacy, not just for himself, but for every athlete who came after him.
The narrative's focus shifted to Jalen's sanctuary of suffering and hope, Anya's clinic. The air was filled with a mix of rubber, sweat, and the calming, subtle scent of lavender that Anya used to create a more peaceful environment. The metallic sound of the machines became the rhythm of his new routine. Each day, Jalen meticulously executed a series of exercises, all based on science and precision, not mechanical repetition. The narrator described the drills with visceral detail. Single-leg squats to strengthen his stability, his muscles trembling under the strain. Proprioception exercises on a Bosu ball to retrain his body to recognize its position in space. And balance drills that demanded intense mental focus as his body swayed precariously. He was rebuilding his leg, not just with weight, but with intention, muscle by muscle, fiber by fiber. He could feel the new strength building, the familiar ache of effort replacing the sharp sting of pain. The physical rehabilitation was the canvas upon which Jalen painted his true internal battle, the war for his mind. The narrator delved deep into the concepts of fear and anxiety, which manifested as phantom pains in his knee with every risky movement he attempted. Anya's voice, calm and steady, was his guide. She used short, concise phrases and powerful metaphors, reminding him that he was in a war against doubt. She encouraged him to use visualization and mental imagery, a practice that, she explained, was scientifically proven to speed up both physical and psychological recovery. Jalen would close his eyes, not just to rest, but to see. He visualized the perfect execution of a play, a graceful cut, a powerful leap. He pictured his body healing, his tendons mending, his muscles firing in perfect sync. He wasn't just imagining a future on the field. He was feeling the confidence of his body responding to every command, rewriting the narrative of his own life in his mind. For Jalen, the grueling pain of rehabilitation connected him with the deep-rooted stories of struggle within his community. In a flashback, the narrative delved into the rich history of Black athletes in New Orleans and beyond. He remembered his father telling him about the 1965 American Football League AFL All-Star Game, which had been scheduled for Tulane Stadium in New Orleans. On that cold January day, 21 Black players, including legendary figures of the sport, decided to stage a historic boycott after facing blatant racism and discrimination in the city's French Quarter. They refused to play, choosing dignity over sport, and their protest forced the league to move the game to Houston. This act of rebellion, which nearly cost New Orleans its chance at a professional football team, was a powerful demonstration that the fight for human rights was more important than the sport itself. Jalen also recalled the story of Bobby Greer, the first Black athlete to play in the Sugar Bowl in 1956 in New Orleans. Greer and his team, the University of Pittsburgh Panthers, had to fight just to get on the field. The governor of Georgia tried to keep Georgia Tech from playing unless Greer was benched. Students at both universities protested, with "No Greer, no game" becoming a powerful slogan. Despite the immense pressure and the fact that he was forced to stay in a segregated dorm, Greer played a pivotal role in the game. Jalen felt a deep connection to these stories. He saw that his personal struggle was a continuation of a much larger ongoing fight. The pain in his knee was a physical manifestation of a history of systemic neglect and injustice, a history that his ancestors had fought against. Marcus, who had once been so cynical about the system, now watched his son with a newfound respect. He saw the science and mental resilience that Anya taught not as a new weakness, but a modern and powerful form of battle against an old enemy. The chapter concluded with Jalen advancing to the final and most crucial phase of his recovery, the return to sport. He began to incorporate explosive strength exercises and football-specific drills into his routine. Every jump he made was an act of faith, a test of his body and his mind. The narrator emphasized that, despite his physical readiness, the confidence in his leg was still an invisible wound that needed to be healed. His rehabilitation wasn't just about curing a physical injury, it was about rewriting the narrative of his own life, a life that had been so defined by his physical prowess. His battle wasn't against an opponent on the field, but against the very system that had tried to break him. His revenge would be to prove that holistic care, mental resilience, and the power of science could heal what the system couldn't even see. The physical pain became a constant reminder of his resilience, and the victory that was approaching would be a triumph for his community, a new form of rebellion and excellence that proved the human spirit, when guided by science and dignity, was stronger than any form of injustice.
The day of the test run arrived, and with it, the chance for Jalen Carter to prove, once and for all, that he was ready for the field. The late afternoon sun in New Orleans was a heavy, humid blanket, and the air was thick with moisture. The narrator, with its limited omniscience, dove deep into Jalen's mind. He felt the familiar pull of the stadium, the worn turf of the practice field, the low, expectant hum of the other players. He was a rookie again, fighting for a place that was once indisputably his. The heavy breathing of his teammates, the sharp smell of freshly cut grass, and the electric tension in the air were almost paralyzing. He knew their eyes were on him, some filled with hope, others with skepticism. He had to prove to everyone that the system that had discarded him, that had seen him as a broken asset, was wrong. During a crucial drill that required a sharp, explosive change of direction, a lateral hop, to mimic a quick cut, Jalen felt the ghost of his injury haunt him. The moment he was about to plant his foot, the muscle memory of his fall, The chilling snap of his ACL flooded his senses. The fear of re-injury, the cold statistic of a 38% re-injury rate for rushed returns screamed in his mind. His body, reacting to the psychological trauma, physically guarded itself. The narrator described the tension in his muscles, the way his feet protected themselves, and an almost imperceptible hesitation that paralyzed him for a crucial microsecond. He lost his step, his balance faltered, and he nearly fell. The ball sailed past him, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The coach, a man who saw only results, shook his head. Jalen felt the familiar look of disappointment and doubt in his eyes, a look that mirrored the silent judgment of the system that had failed him. He felt small again, as if all his grueling months of rehabilitation had been in vain. The invisible wound of his confidence had sabotaged his physical readiness. After the training session, Jalen sat alone on a bench, his hands covering his face, the immense weight of the system pressing down on his shoulders. He felt a deep sense of shame and failure. Dr. Anya Sharma approached her, her presence a calming anchor in the storm of his emotions. Her voice was calm and steady, but the narrator's use of indirect dialogue ensured the emotional intensity was not lost. She told him that his failure wasn't physical, it was a manifestation of his fear. She spoke of the vicious cycle where fear of re-injury leads to altered movement patterns and physical guarding, ironically increasing the risk of another injury. She reminded him that the battle of his life was not against the injury itself, but against the system that tried to define him, to tell him who he was. She advised him to release the weight of expectation, his father's silent gaze, and his own crippling self-doubt. The narrator paraphrased her advice. "You're not fighting for a place. You're fighting for a new identity." The journey wasn't about returning to who he was before, but about becoming something new, something stronger, something wiser. A man who had faced the system and learned to overcome its invisible weight. Jalen spent the night awake, haunted by his fear. He took a solitary walk through his neighborhood, the sound of his footsteps and the soft light from the streetlights his only companions. The narrator described his visualization in powerful, sensory detail. He closed his eyes and didn't just see the game-winning touchdown, he saw the perfection of his knee's movement, the effortless grace of his cut, the relief on Dr. Anya's face, and the silent pride in his father's eyes. He remembered the stories of black athletes who had fought for their dignity and principles, figures like Muhammad Ali, who had risked his career to stand against the Vietnam War, and Colin Kaepernick, who had knelt to protest police brutality. He understood that his struggle was a continuation of theirs, a modern chapter in a long, unbroken narrative of black resilience and defiance. He realized that his narrative identity was not that of a broken kid, as the system saw him, but of a man who had faced a deep-seated injustice and was about to overcome it with dignity and strength. His revenge would be an act of excellence, a living testament to the power of science, mental resilience, and human dignity against a system that tried to see him as nothing more than a disposable asset.
The day of the final match arrived with a sense of quiet inevitability. The rain had washed the streets of New Orleans, leaving the air with the fresh scent of wet asphalt and the promise of a clean slate. The narrator described the stadium with heightened sensory details: the freshly cut grass, the metallic scent of rain on the turf, and the brilliant floodlights that looked like drops of light against the dark, ominous sky. Jalen stood in the tunnel, and the roar of the crowd was a muffled, distant sound, a low hum of energy he could feel in his bones. The game was a series of plays, a dance of choreographed violence, but for Jalen, it was a profound act of faith. The narrator's third-person perspective described the fluidity of his movements, the newfound confidence in his knee. He wasn't playing with the brute force of his past.
He was playing with the wisdom of his experience, using the biomechanics Anya had taught him, the precision and intelligence of a man who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. He made a crucial play, not by overpowering his opponent, but by making a quick, elegant cut that was a testament to his recovery. His movements were fluid, graceful, a powerful rebuttal to the doubt that had once crippled him. The climax of the story was the final game-winning touchdown. The narration, in an emotional and indirect style, focused not on the score, but on the profound emotions of Jalen and his community. The crowd's roar was no longer muffled. It was a physical force, a scream of victory and liberation. Jalen looked up to the stands and saw his father, Marcus, and Dr. Anya Sharma standing side by side. In Marcus's eyes, there was no more skepticism, no more silent disappointment, only a deep, profound pride. In Anya's face, there was the silent satisfaction of a victory that wasn't just his, but belonged to her scientific and holistic approach. Jalen's victory was not just a touchdown, it was a powerful piece of evidence, a proof of concept that it was possible to overcome a system that had tried to break him. It was a victory for science, for human dignity, and for every athlete who came after him. The epilogue showed Jalen in a press conference, but his speech was not about personal glory or the game itself. He spoke with a newfound authority, a voice for those who had been silenced. He talked about the importance of science, of mental health, and of the need for holistic care for athletes. He shared his journey, the pain of his fall, the fight against fear, and the ultimate triumph of science and resilience. He explicitly linked his personal story to the broader Black experience in America, citing the legacy of athletes like Muhammad Ali and Colin Kaepernick, who had used their platforms to fight for social justice. He explained how his revenge was not an act of anger, but a profound act of overcoming and excellence, a complete rejection of a system that saw him as a disposable asset. The story ended with a universal observation that connected Jalen's journey to the reader's own life. His struggle was the struggle of everyone who faces a system that tries to limit them, a system that sees them as a resource rather than a person. His victory, forged in resilience and science, became a powerful beacon for his community, proving that human dignity and holistic care are the most powerful weapons against injustice. His story, now told, became a construction of reality and identity for the Black community, a testament to the fact that resilience and science were the most powerful weapons against injustice. The final image of Jalen standing on the field was not of a lonely winner, but of a man who had become part of a larger, ongoing narrative of struggle and resilience. His victory in the game was just the beginning of his new journey, a journey of empowerment and change for future generations. He had returned to the field not just as a player, but as a living legacy.